The AMX strike jet flies for Italy in War Thunder. Let's check it out. Back in the 1970s, the Italian Air Force wanted to replace its older G91s with a new close air support jet, but nothing was currently available. Air Italia and Air Macchi, the two primary Italian aviation companies, formed an agreement to work together on a new design, drawing from some recent projects at both companies. Once word of this got out, the Brazilian company Embraer also got involved after lobbying by the Brazilian government, as they too were interested in replacing their older fleet of MB-236s. After the basic design was finalized, work was split between the three companies, with each producing different parts of the aircraft in order to avoid any internal competition within the project. The first flight took place in 1984, with the prototype unfortunately crashing early in the test program, but otherwise the development went along without any major accidents or delays. Initial deliveries started in 1988 for Italy and 1989 for Brazil. The jet itself is small and light, but carries an impressive weapon load for an aircraft of its size. However, the Brazilian and Italian versions have some key differences due to US State Department export controls and the refusal to allow Brazil to purchase a few specific components, including the built-in M61 cannon. As the plane is primarily focused on ground attack, it carries mostly air-to-ground ordnance, but it can also use a selection of basic infrared air-to-air missiles for self-defense. Since its introduction, Italian AMX jets have seen occasional combat in a few different conflicts, and it's generally considered to have been a success. In total, over 200 AMX strike jets have been built across several versions, and it continues in active service with both Italy and Brazil into the 2020s. What we get in War Thunder is the AMX Ghibli, a strike jet in rank 7 of the Italian tech tree with a battle rating of 10.3. This jet has a surprisingly modern combat system for its BR, with a full ballistics computer, an EEGS, which is slaved to the targeting pod by the way, not the radar, and the AN/ALR-67 radar warning receiver, which tracks into the J-band and has a very modern set of features. Its radar is the ELTA ELM-2001B. This is a basic radar rangefinder, but notably it's fixed in pulse Doppler all-aspect mode. This won't do much for you in practice, but it can help get locks with your air-to-air missiles. The loadouts this jet gets include a pair of tip winders and 5 pylons for various bombs or rocket pods, plus a centerline targeting pod. It actually gets some relatively heavy loadout options for such a small jet. Your air-to-air missile is the AIM-9L. This is a 30G all-aspect weapon with a very good performance at this BR range, and it can also slave to your radar rangefinder. Frankly, it's a little surprising that you don't have to grind up to this from a crappier Sidewinder, but here it is. For guided air-to-ground weapons, you can take 3 different flavors of laser-guided bombs. As with some other strike jets, you can take more of the smaller bombs, but all of them are going to need a direct hit to take out targets. The GBU-24 Paveway 3 really stands out here, as it gets inertial tracking, which lets it survive brief losses in laser locks against moving targets without wobbling off course or anything, and it's also got the largest warhead. The Paveway 3 will be able to take out clusters of ground units or targets on a near miss. The flight performance of the AMX may take you a little while to get used to, and it's got a lot of quirks. The most important piece of advice I'm going to give you is not to bother with the hydraulic control boosters. This jet has severe wing rip issues from over-G maneuvering, and if it turns with full fuel or a weapon load at high speeds, the boosters make this problem even worse. If you find your wings snapping off all the time, unequip the boosters as your first step. Your second step is just to slow down. Try to keep this jet below around 700 or 800 kilometers an hour before you go into kind of hard maneuvers with a weapon load. If you're mostly clean or flying with just the tip winders, you can get away with some faster turns, but wing rips are still going to happen sometimes. The engine power is another weird quirk. The jet is subsonic and it doesn't have an afterburner. The engine feels underpowered when you've got a load of bombs, but it feels kinda overpowered for a non-afterburning engine when you're flying clean. If you fly out with just the missiles, You may have to watch your throttle to avoid any speed-related wing rip problems, but when you've got a full load of bombs, the jet feels like it's barely hanging on for dear life sometimes, with significantly reduced acceleration and climb performance. Really, it's just because this is a very light jet, and a full weapon load is going to make up a greater fraction of the plane's overall weight compared to a larger, heavier jet. With all of that said, the jet is reasonably aerobatic without a bomb load, but it does tend to do better in horizontal maneuvers rather than vertical ones. It's got combat flaps, which also drop the leading edge slats and can deploy at basically any airspeed for a quick maneuvering boost, as well as a fairly effective set of air brakes. Taking the AMX out into air battles really is more fun than I expected it to be. Yes, this is another subsonic ground pounder, but after you drop the bombs, or if you just don't take them, this jet can do reasonably well with air combat, mostly thanks to the AIM-9L. At this BR, all-aspect missiles tend to be pretty unbalanced and overpowered, since some of your opponents won't even have flares, especially in a down tier, and if you're picky with your shots, you can get a lot of kills with them. Something important to consider, as I mentioned a couple of minutes ago, is that the EEGS for the M61 cannon is slaved to your targeting pod, and not the radar rangefinder. This is less than ideal, as getting a target lock with the laser targeting pod against a moving aircraft is pretty difficult and it takes a lot of practice. But if you can make it work, the EEGS makes aiming your Vulcan cannon significantly easier than just eyeballing it. With a valid lock, the EEGS will activate at about 1.5 kilometers. In terms of ground attack in air battles, the AMX has no problem taking out a base in one pass or going in for AI ground units. But just remember that you're going to be one of the slowest jets on the team, and all the afterburning fighters are usually going to beat you to the targets. For close air support, the AMX is a great choice. The CLDP targeting pod has a strong optical zoom, good thermals, and an auto tracker, which are pretty high tier features for a plane at this BR, and the laser guided bombs you get are very effective. The usual caveats apply though, about sometimes targets moving into cover or getting killed before your bomb lands if you drop them from high altitude. Also, the countermeasures on the AMX can help quite a bit over a ground battle, and even its dumb bombs can be very effective and easy to aim thanks to the ballistics computer. Overall, close air support really feels like this jet's native habitat, and in my opinion, it's the most effective game mode for the AMX. Visually, this is a neat looking little jet. It has a simple design and a nice flat gray paint job, but I find it pretty appealing, even if that refueling probe can be a little weird. It's also very small, which some people like. Overall, good visuals for the AMX. When you're going into land, there are a couple of things to remember. The landing gear is very narrow, so don't rely on S-turns and stuff on the runway. And the engine thrust isn't great at low speeds, so you might have to watch the throttle a bit. You can drop gear at around 430 kilometers an hour and flaps a little bit higher. No drag chute, but it gets an arrestor hook that you'll never get to use. The cockpit on this jet is surprisingly good for a ground pounder, with the radar warning receiver in a great spot, an MFD, a useful HUD, and decent visibility in most directions. It's a Shakemaster 9000 plane though, so you're going to get a lot of vibrations at high speed, but overall it's a great cockpit. To close out on the AMX, this jet gets powerful air-to-ground weapons, has a really good targeting pod, carries all-aspect IR missiles at a very low BR, and it has a great cockpit for flying in VR. However, it's got wing rip issues that you need to think about. It's slower than most jets it goes up against, and the EEGS is slaved to the targeting pod instead of the radar rangefinder, which is kinda weird. The final verdict on the AMX Ghibli is that this is a fun little jet, and it finally gives Italy some competitive close air support below rank 8. If you're an Italian main, I strongly suggest getting this plane, and once you get used to its quirks, it won't let you down. As always, thanks for watching.